Sans the Skeleton, pun-spouting space warper of the underground. Pablo the Judge, Off's guardian of Zone Zero. For every joke, there's a reaction. For every action, there is a consequence. For every sin, there is judgment. He's Wiz and I'm Boomstick, and it's our job to analyze their weapons, armor, and skills to find out who would win a death battle. Long ago, two races ruled over Earth, humans and monsters. One day, war broke out between the two races. After a long battle, the humans were victorious. They sealed the monsters underground with a magic spell. Thus would begin the Undertale. The only thing capable of destroying the barrier were human souls, 7 of them to be exact. So the monsters would theoretically be able to escape should they collect the souls of enough unfortunate humans who fell into the underground. Fortunately, the monsters were peaceful people, with the king and queen even adopting the first child to fall. Though, this would change when this adopted child, as well as the prince, tragically died. Overcome with grief, King Asgore declared that any further humans were to be killed, driving his wife Toriel away from him in the process and further driving him into despair. Many years later, deep below Mount Ebott, 6 of the 7 souls needed had been collected. And, as you might have guessed, seeing as they were all sealed underground in isolated communities, everyone knew everyone else down there, which made it even weirder one day when a pair of monsters mysteriously rolled in, without any clue as to where they came from. These were the Skeleton Brothers, Sans and Papyrus. Papyrus, the more active of the two, quickly set to work making as many friends as possible and trying to fulfill his dream of joining the Royal Guard under the esteemed Captain Undyne. Sans did not that. Sans worked several jobs, though worked with being generous. By his own admission, he only did it to be granted more breaks. Don't question it. The point is, Sans would much rather spend his days lounging around with his trombone, telling jokes, and stacking hot dogs on people's heads than move a muscle. Well, not that he had any muscles to move, mind you. Still, like most monsters, Sans was happy at the prospect of seeing the surface, and held down a sentry checkpoint in the forest of Snowden, passing the hours in the cold by practicing knock-knock jokes on an ominous door he had stumbled upon near his outpost. Imagine his surprise when one day the door answered back. Unbeknownst to Sans, he had found the hiding place of the former queen, Toriel. And, if you remember, Toriel really wasn't big on this whole killing humans idea. Befriending Sans through a mutual love of jokes through the door, Toriel made Sans promise not to kill or hurt any human who ever came through. Sans, who at this point was just going with the flow of unlife, agreed. Fortunate too, given it wouldn't be too long until a human child stumbled out of that door and into the woods. Sans, true to his word, kept an eye on the child, following them throughout their travels through the underground and watching them grow and befriend the monsters within. Toriel, Papyrus, even Undyne and King Asgore, all were able to be reminded of the love they'd once known, and it was thanks to this pacifism and peace that this child, named Frisk, was able to destroy the barrier and all monster kind went free. Hey, what a happy ending! But of course, that's just one timeline. I wonder what's going on in this other time. Oh no. Sans once said that if it wasn't for that promise he made, the human would be dead where they stood. Which means he probably regretted said promise when Frisk, guided by the influence of a mysterious higher force, began the meditated genocide of monster kind. This wasn't just self-defense. The kid was going out of their way to hack through each and every last straggler. Though Sans isn't dumb. In fact, he's insanely more intelligent than he lets on. So intelligent, in fact, that he'd been studying timelines and time-space phenomena, and was successfully able to identify that he and everyone else have been living in a loop of sorts. That's why he's been so uncaring and chill about everything. He knows one day it'll all be reset anyways. Though, of course, he's still far from happy about the deaths of his loved ones, temporary or not. But even this genocide wasn't enough to drive him to action. That is, until the very end. Frisk had grown powerful enough to reawaken the dark soul of the first fallen human, Kara, and under their corruption, threatened to erase the timeline entirely. No do-overs, no resets. Everything would be gone. Sans couldn't sit idly anymore. Facing down the human in the hollowed halls of the capital, Sans delivered a final judgment against the person he knew was once a friend. Don't let his demeanor fool you. Sans is no slouch in a fight. His stats are the lowest in the game. 1 attack and 1 defense. Strong enough to, snap a branch by stepping on it. Huh. But if Sans teaches you anything, it's not to be deceived by appearances. What Sans lacks in raw power, he makes up for in capabilities. While his attacks do minimal damage, they're able to strike multiple times. Imagine being stabbed with a sword, and then for every moment that sword is inside you, it's like being stabbed by an entire new sword. That's what Sans's attacks hit like, made even more dangerous by the fact that monsters like him attack your soul directly, rather than worry about trying to damage your body. Speaking of souls, he can also turn them blue, effectively amplifying their gravity and preventing them from freely moving. He can also inflict a state known as karmic retribution, weaponizing your own sins against you to eat you up from the inside. Handy against a genocidal maniac like Frisk. And while he's frail enough to go down in one hit, good luck hitting him. He's able to casually sidestep and dodge all manner of attacks, even while asleep. He was even able to blitz and overwhelm Frisk, who's fast enough to outspeed monsters like Tsundere Plane that can fly faster than lightning. Also worth noting is that monsters, Sans included, lack physical anatomy, and are instead constructs made of magic. He can conjure bones to impale or bludgeon his enemies, either shooting them or making them erupt from surfaces. He can call upon massive energy cannons known as Gaster Blasters, skull-shaped artillery capable of firing devastating beams. He can teleport himself and his attacks, warp space to change or loop the area around him, telekinetically throw you around, and even stop time. As yet another trick, he can turn his attacks blue, making them impossible to dodge unless you know the trick to avoiding them, standing perfectly still. He's not one to hold back once the fight starts either. He always makes sure to open with full force, no pulling punches. He's also a master of the dunk, luring his opponent into a false sense of security with a false surrender, only to skewer them when they least expect it. Wiz, I'm pretty sure that's a war crime. That's right, Boomstick. But Sans isn't without fault. Even until the end, he had a habit of dozing off, and if a fight goes on long enough, he has a tendency to fall asleep. Though this can sometimes be used to his advantage, like with his special attack, doing nothing for so long that you don't get to take a turn. Whether or not Sans was successful in his goal varies from timeline to timeline. In some, Frisk gives up. In some, they go on to destroy reality. In others still, Frisk goes back to where it all began and makes amends. And of course, in most, it never happened to begin with. Yeah, and if you ask almost anyone, they'll tell you Sans is the lazy bag of bones jokester who'd rather write a dozen sticky notes than pick up a single sock. But to a select few, he's the underground's last line of defense. And his puns aren't the only thing that'll make you cry. In the end, the joke will be on you. So maybe weigh your options before treating every monster as an enemy. Because if you go down that route, you're gonna have a bad time. There existed a man on a sacred mission. Wearing a simple baseball uniform and not sporting a name, this man was simply known as the Batter. And his quest was purification. In this world, nefarious zone guardians ruled over the various regions, known as zones, and tormented the population with malevolent specters. And it was up to the Batter to eradicate these threats and bring purity to the zones. Though this world was strange and alien. Fortunately, the Batter had a guide to help steer him. This feline friend was named Pablo, though most simply knew him as the Judge. Impressive title, but Pablo was a jokester at heart. A friendly, smiling face to crack some levity. The Judge would work with the mysterious entity known as the Player to show the Batter the ropes. Solving puzzles, fighting specters, that sort of thing. Up first was Zone 1, a series of towns ruled by the vulgar Dadan. Fighting his way through to the end, the Batter defeated Dadan and purified the first zone. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned in Zone 2. The Judge and the Batter would encounter Pablo's brother, Valerie, though something was off, no pun intended. Valerie was calling himself Japhet, and seemed constantly on edge. That's because it wasn't Valerie at all. In truth, it was the Guardian of Zone 2, the Phoenix Japhet, who had killed Valerie and was puppeteering his corpse around. The Batter would slay Japhet, but the Judge was overcome with grief at the loss of his brother. The Batter pressed onwards, but the Judge began to have doubts, even after Zones 2 and 3 were purified. To get between zones, the batter and the judge had access to special portals that let them enter another realm known as the Nothingness, letting them travel at the speed of light between the zones. Using this, the judge was able to visit the purified zones, and he'd soon wish he hadn't. All signs of life were gone. This purification he'd been helping this whole time had been nothing more than a slaughter. The only sounds in the air were remnant screams and a constant droning banging. Nothing but the haunting symphony of what once was. It was as if the world had simply been turned off. The judge was horrified. Worse yet, the batter was approaching the final zone. The batter had even defeated the leader of the Zone Guardians, the Queen, who was able to power her own zone of the room that contained an entire sun inside of it. And now, the batter was nearing the switch that would let him purify everything. The switch that would let him turn it all off. The judge had to do something. The batter was no hero. His methods of purification were and always had been cruel and twisted. Perfect peace and order, only achieved by wiping the slate clean. The judge has been blind to that up until now, but he saw the batter for what he really was. A monster, warped and evil, plain and simple. But if the batter can beat a chick that can power a star, what's a cat gonna do? His best. Confronting the batter in the final chamber, the judge did, what else, but pass judgment. He can do what you'd expect a cat to be able to do, tearing you apart with his teeth and claws, but he's got more tricks than that up his sleeve. He's faster than you'd expect. Being able to keep up with the batter shows that much, given the batter could climb a massive chimney at a velocity over 80% the speed of sound. Going blow for blow with the batter means he's crazy strong as well, given the Queen's sun shenanigans. Cat attacks aside, he can also use powerful abilities, or competences, to cripple his foes. He does these by inflicting biological trauma, like aneurysms or sclerosis. Or, well, that's what they're called anyways, but he's able to use them and his other attacks on the batter's add-ons, which are just rings made of spiritual energy. Because they're biologically induced, the judge doesn't need to aim them. Just focus on what he wants to affect. There's no dodging, they simply just happen, though they do take a second for him to activate. Still not sure how they're biological when they work on magic rings, but hey, you do you, kitty. Even without using the Nothingness, the judge is able to teleport himself around. Handy for fighting would-be mass murderers. Wiz, I don't think there's a would-be about it. The batter was a mass murderer. True. And, even though he had no way of knowing, the judge felt himself responsible for the death. He had been the one to get the batter started after all. For all his good intentions, the judge is prone to gullibility, and can be tricked if you appeal to his nature of assuming the best in everyone. Unfortunately, the judge wouldn't be able to stop the batter, and ultimately, the world would be turned off. In the canonical ending anyways. In the bonus ending, the judge actually succeeds. Yeah, partnering up with the player, the judge puts an end to the batter's rampage. But, unfortunately, that's but a fantasy. Even the timeline that leaves the judge in a dead world is out of reach. The world is fated to end, and he can't escape that. It's a tragic fate either way, doomed to nothingness or doomed to isolation. The only way to win is to not even play, but it's too late for that. But even with this looming dread, the judge's smile won't fade. No matter what faces him on the horizon, he'll do everything in his power to protect the last shreds of the world. And if it's going down, he's going with it. Alright, the combatants are set. We've run the data through all possibilities. It's time for a death battle!
You're, not my usual kid, you know?
Believe me, Skeleton, I am quite familiar with your kid. It is your apathy and inaction that has allowed them to carry out their misdeeds. Look around you, comedian. See the dust in the air. Their blood may not be on your hands, but it was you that allowed these events to transpire.
Look, buddy pal, I really don't have time for this.
I see you are holding the line. This is good, but I simply cannot allow you to go free.
Hey, What can I say? Promise is a promise.
And I am sure she will appreciate it. After all, you're soon to meet again.
Well, guess we're doing this the hard way.
Sorry, but I don't have time for games.
Ooh, did you get him? Do you feel it? Your sins crawling on your back.
Ah, you're one to talk. I've accepted my mistakes. You just need to do the same. Not pulling punches, are we?
No. Always wondered why more people don't open strong.
Not strong enough, unfortunately.
Stronger than you. How was the fall?
Just me and you, comedian. Yes?
I've been doing this for an eternity, pal. This isn't anything new.
No one does play fair if they think they can get away with it.
Okay, buddy, I think that's enough. Oh, no you don't. You're gonna be here a long time.
So, this is your gambit? Waiting me out?
I'm a patient guy. I get it. I can't. What? Did you think I'd die just like that?
Yes, I did think you would. Wait, this is... ketchup? Just need to focus. Just need to avoid this.
Alright, I think this has gone on long enough. What do you say we, call it quits?
I can tell when the battle is lost. Well played, comedian. I have no regrets. I see now that I am outmatched. I will not threaten you again.
No. No, you won't. Well, ready?
KO! Well, looks like the only bag we'll be putting that cat back into is a body bag. While it may be surprising given the absolutely massive gap in power, a more thorough examination revealed that Sand had all the tricks needed to take Pablo down. Yeah, starting with that power gap, it doesn't take a genius to know the judge was leagues stronger than Sand's. The queen powering a sun is obviously more impressive than, breaking a stick. The judge would be able to easily blow Sans away with a single hit. But the thing is, so can anyone else. Sans is more than used to fighting people capable of taking him down in one shot, so the judge wouldn't be indifferent in that regard. Sans always prioritizes dodging and avoiding attacks. Let's see if he'd be fast enough to actually do that. The answer, if you couldn't already tell, is yes. The judge can climb at speeds nearing Mach 1, but Sans can blitz lightning dodgers like Frisk, who can move at multiple times that speed. And while the judge can move at light speed within the nothingness, it's not something he can pull off normally. Considering the nothingness was created as a way to get from point A to point B quickly, it's also unlikely the judge would have developed the mystic reaction speed needed to steer himself there under normal circumstances, and is just able to as a side effect of the realm. So, as it stands, Sans is fast enough to avoid anything Pablo throws at him in terms of basic attacks. But wouldn't those competences still hit? The judge doesn't need to aim them after all, and them being able to affect add-ons means Sans would be vulnerable to them, despite being a skeleton made of magic. The competences would be able to kill Sans if the judge had time to use them. Unfortunately for Pablo, that's not something Sans would allow. Remember, Sans' attacks, like all monsters, damage the soul directly, bypassing physicality. It didn't matter how much stronger Judge was, Sans' attacks were going to hurt. So, with his speed advantage, Sans would be able to draw first blood, which is even more likely when combined with his tendency to always open with his strongest attack. Pablo would be overwhelmed almost immediately, especially against the blue attacks he'd have no way of knowing how to dodge, or Sans being able to teleport his own attacks around the battlefield and stop time. Though, to his credit, he'd be able to resist karmic retribution on account of, not committing genocide. Blaming yourself for one doesn't really count. So, while the judge did hold a massive power advantage, it's not a situation Sans is a stranger to, and Sans was fast enough to shatter the judge's soul before Pablo could get a competence set. Even if Pablo was able to concentrate long enough to use one, remember that they take a second to actually activate, giving Sans even more time to get its hits in and leaving the judge blocked once more. Sans wouldn't be able to one-shot per se, but because of the sheer speed at which the attacks would be coming at Pablo, and their ability to hit dozens of times per second, he'd effectively just need one solid volley to put Pablo down, which he should have no problem pulling off. And while the judge could teleport, again, that's assuming he actually has time to react, which is something he'd struggle with Sans opening at full force immediately and not letting up. His teleportation would certainly help, but he simply wouldn't be able to react fast enough to Sans' onslaught to reliably weave through all of it. And Sans' own teleportation, telekinesis, and space warping would make it so that if he wanted, he could keep himself constantly out of Pablo's view and range, effectively shutting down Pablo's attacks altogether. If the fight went on long enough, Sans would also be able to exploit Pablo's gullibility to dunk him. And while Sans can pass out after prolonged fights, it's unlikely the fight would go on that long. And even if it did, Sans can quite literally dodge in his sleep anyways. The judge absolutely dwarfs Sans in power, but the skeleton's speed, durability bypassing attacks, and tendency to draw first blood let him snatch a victory. Looks like the judge ended up totally boned. Really? Boned? Sorry, Wiz, cat's got my tongue. The winner is Sans the Skeleton.
Yippee!